Welcome to Mrs. E English Skills. I'm Mrs. E and today we're looking at starting to analyse text with AQA GCSE English Language, Paper 1 Question 1 and introducing P.E.E. or in other words, Point, Evidence, Explain. How are you assessed for Paper 1? Here is a snapshot taken from the AQA website. Today's lesson concentrates on Section A, reading, and starts to introduce the question types you will be asked. So the title for Section A is Explorations in Creative Reading. The source for the reading questions will be a literature fiction text from either the 20th or the 21st century, and here are some examples of ones that have been used in the past. It will include extracts from novels and short stories, focusing on openings, endings, narrative perspectives and point of view, narrative or descriptive passages, character, atmospheric descriptions, and any other appropriate narrative and descriptive approaches. Let's look at the question types for Paper 1, Section A. The great thing about AQA is they have a certain structure for their question types and they do not deviate from this structure, so you will know each question type and when it's going to appear on the paper. So first, they have one short form question worth 4 marks. List 4 things you learn about. Then they have 2 longer form questions, both worth 8 marks. How does the writer use language? How has the writer structured the text too? Finally, they have an extended question worth 20 marks, where you're given a statement and asked to what extent do you agree. I will be going through each question type throughout this playlist, so keep an eye out for these videos being uploaded. For today, we're looking at the first question, the short form question worth 4 marks, and I'm going to do a little introduction to Point, Evidence, Explain. So we've been given our questions, and now we have to read the text. But what are we looking for? Sometimes meaning is obvious as it is written down exactly as it is intended. This is called explicit meaning. So if we were to be told John was unhappy with his work-life balance, there's nothing else really to find in order to gain that meaning from that text. What is that text saying? It's saying it out loud without having to do any further work to find the answer. Sometimes we have to read between the lines to ascertain the author's intention. This is called implicit meaning, and this means something that is suggested rather than said directly or written directly, and it's suggested by the language that is used. Writers like to draw you into a text, and it's up to you to draw conclusions about what is being said by analysing the language and the structure the writer has chosen. Let's look at an example. John looked around the dark, echoing, stationery-packed prison where he spent his working life. It had gone 10 o'clock. The clock mocked him with every tick as he faced another deadline. Yet again his children would be long asleep before he got home. Let's analyse this piece of text to see if we can establish the meaning. So on the first line we have dark, echoing, stationery-packed prison. This is describing John's workplace. The adjectives dark and echoing suggest it's night time and the office is empty. Stationery packed suggests it's an office, as you would assume an office would have a lot of stationery. Then John calls it a prison, which is quite confusing. Why would he call his work establishment a prison? Does he feel trapped? Is it an unpleasant environment for him? To call something something it is not for dramatic effect is a metaphor. Then we're told it had gone 10 o'clock. So this establishes or solidifies the fact that it is in fact night time and it's long past the traditional 9 till 5 working hours. So this time frame or this link to time makes us fully realise that he is working overtime. Then we've got the clock mocked in. This is a technique called personification, and it makes something that's not a person sound as if it was a person. And we can identify with this thing easier. The fact that it mocked him suggests that it's laughing at the fact that he is still there in the office long after when he should have gone home. And how he feels about the clock, he's looking up at it, but what's the point in looking up at it when he knows he shouldn't even be there in the first place? So we can analyse that as why he feels the clock is mocking him. Then we've got the information that this is another deadline, and yet again his children will be asleep before he got home. So this explains the backstory. This isn't the first time this has happened to John. It seems like it's a regular occurrence. And then the fact that his children would be long asleep before he got home. This is quite emotive. So not only is he missing out on his children are missing out on their father. It seems as if maybe his work and life are unbalanced. So if we had to sum up, what is the writer suggesting? Would you agree that John is unhappy with his work-life balance? If you remember from the explicit example, John was unhappy with his work-life balance. This implicit section is basically saying the same thing, but rather than just telling the reader, it is showing the reader instead, so they form their own conclusions and they actively take part in the story, which increases engagement and makes them want to read on. Paper 1, question 1, if you remember this is the short form question worth 4 marks, is looking for explicit information. So you don't need to analyse the text in order to find the answers. Let's look at an example. Read the first part of the source at the beach, lines 1 to 11. List 4 things from this part of the text that show what the beach looks like that morning. Let's look at the text. I arrived at the beach at 5 a.m. sharp. I wanted to get a shot of the hazy orange glow of first morning light that trickles across the sea until it touches the sand. The mountains can usually be seen as distant silhouettes rising like giants above the horizon. Pretty shells dot along the water's edge, having been given up the previous evening. But not today. Everything was a muted grey. There were no signs of the magnificent mountains, no orange starting to invade the horizon. The air had a bite to it, and there were waves crashing against the jagged rocks on the cliff edge by the caravan park. In place of pretty shells lay sprawling seaweed, strangling any shells that had dared to venture from the safety of the water. For 5 consecutive mornings the beach had been an immeasurable wonder, the most beautiful of dreams. Today, the day I had finally decided to capture this moment, it had turned into a murky, uncomfortable nightmare. For this question, you just need to locate 4 pieces of text that show us what the beach looks like that morning and write them in a list for your answer. Pause this video here to have a go before I reveal the answers. Okay, let's look at the answers. First, let's look back at the question. So we're looking for what the beach looks like that morning. Make sure you've really read this question so you don't go wrong. What does the beach look like that morning? No morning before and no morning after. Once we know this, we can get rid of the sections of this text that are irrelevant. The first part of this text is talking about how the beach usually looks, but not today. The first thing we could pick up is everything was a muted grey. Number 2, there were no signs of the magnificent mountains. Number 3, no orange starting to invade the horizon. We would cross out the air had a bite to it, as that's how the beach feels rather than what it looks like. But we could put there were waves crashing against the jagged rocks. So we have our 4, but 1 for good luck is always good. So we could put the sprawling seaweed that are strangling the shells. How did you do? For questions 2 to 4, longer, more structured answers are required. In preparation for further study, let's look at this structure. Structuring your answers. When analysing implicit meaning, as well as having lots of ideas, you need to explain them clearly. So let's look at the Point, Evidence, Explain structure, or P.E.E. for short. So first of all, you'll need to think of a point you wish to make which answers the question and is developed from what you find in the text. Next, you would use evidence from the text to support your ideas in the form of quotations. Then you would explain the effects that the writer is trying to have on the reader and the purposes for these by using that quotation or that technique or whatever it is in your point that you have picked up. Let's look at a general question example to practice this. We'll use the same text we used for question 1, at the beach. What impressions do you get of the beach that morning? First, highlight any parts of the text that give you an impression. To have a go, pause this video here before I reveal what I have highlighted. So I have highlighted muted grey, air had a bite to it, crashing, jagged, strangling, safety of the water, murky uncomfortable nightmare. Next, annotate by writing the impression you get. Once again, pause the video here to have a go before I reveal what I have annotated. Okay. First, for muted grey, I've said this sounds dull and depressing. The air had a bite to it and strangling sounds dangerous and painful. Crashing and jagged sounds aggressive and harsh. The fact that the shells had dared to venture from the safety of the water implies that the beach is unsafe if the water is safe. And murky uncomfortable nightmare sounds quite scary. Then label any subject terminology. By using terminology, this can increase your grade. Once again, pause this video to have a go before I reveal the terminology that I've found. Terminology can be language devices or techniques or word classes. Okay, so what I've found is descriptive verb, crashing, strangling, adjectives, muted, jagged, murky and uncomfortable, personification, the air had a bite to it, and a metaphor, the nightmare. Finally, pick 3 impressions to use for your answer. You only need 3-point evidence explains for most answers. I'm going to choose dull and depressing, aggressive and harsh, and dangerous and painful. Let's start to write up our answer in the point, evidence, explain structure. So first, make your first point. So mine is the beach is made to sound dull and depressing. Then add supporting evidence. As she says, everything was a muted grey. Then explain. This description suggests a lack of colour and vibrancy, making the beach sound unappealing and a miserable place to be. Next, make your second point. So mine is the conditions on the beach seem quite harsh and aggressive. Then add the supporting evidence, the description of the waves crashing against the jagged rocks. Then add explain. Creates an atmosphere of danger, particularly when combining with the harsh verb strangling to describe the seaweed. Have you noticed that when I'm using my evidence, or when I'm writing my evidence rather, I am using quotation marks to show the bits that I've taken from the text? And in my explain, I've added a bit more evidence with the verb strangling to back up my claim. This is something you can do to extend your point further. Lastly, make your final point. And mine is the writer suggests it's actually quite painful to be standing at the beach. My evidence is when she personifies the air as having a bite to it. And my closing explain is it's almost as if the beach is attacking her that morning, willing her to leave. Here is my completed answer with my 3 P.E.E. paragraphs. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this first look at AQA GCSE English Language. There are lots more videos to come as I intend to go through the whole course to prepare you for both exams should you be studying them this year. Please subscribe so you don't miss any of the uploads, and if you've liked this video give it a like and share it with anyone who you think might find it useful. Check out my other videos to keep improving your English, particularly the basic skills playlist, as we don't cover this in this playlist. I'm Mrs. E, and I'll see you soon.